Hello everyone, here at OS Reviews. You're watching our throwback look at the Samsung ATIV S Neo in 2018. This is yet another Windows phone that we are revisiting because the cost is very cheap, partly because Windows phones have been kind of killed off. So unlike Android devices, it seems that the retention for pricing has dropped considerably over the past few months. We checked out the Nokia Lumia 700 just a few days ago because it's a $5 phone that you can now find refurbished on Amazon or eBay, which again is a ridiculously low price. This one here is a little bit more expensive. It's around $30, but still very low cost. It's definitely a step up compared to the Lumia 700 in terms of speed, performance, and overall form factor. It does have a much more modern 4.8-inch display size, so about 5 inches in terms of the feeling in the hand. Still not quite as large as a more modern, 2:1 aspect ratio 6-inch phone, but a lot closer in terms of the form factor. Now the S Neo is basically the US version of the ATIV S, which was Samsung's second Windows phone that they released, all under the ATIV line. And it has a dual-core 1.4 gigahertz processor, 16 gigs of built-in storage. We had an 8 megapixel camera on the back, in addition to a front-facing 1.3 megapixel camera. The overall design is very similar to something like a Galaxy S4, a little bit larger than a Galaxy S3, and it really is a classic Samsung look that is recycled from their Android offerings with the button placement and the overall design, but of course running on Windows Phone 8. You'll find access to a 2000 milliamp hour capacity battery, and in addition to a nano SIM, as well as a micro SD card slot for expanding the built-in memory. Turning it over, we do have a physical key for waking up the phone's display, and there's also capacitive keys that are backlit and blue in terms of their accent. And they do have haptic feedback, so it vibrates ever so slightly whenever you tap on them. So this is a laminated LCD panel which offers pretty good viewing angles, but it is a departure from Samsung's norm of incorporating AMOLED screens. So as a result, the contrast, especially the black in the background, isn't quite as punchy or vibrant as on some of their other panels, but it still is an excellent LCD screen, definitely one of the better ones for a 2013 smartphone. And Windows Phone is a very optimized operating system. It doesn't need very powerful hardware to run very smooth, and you can definitely tell that here because it still is chugging around without any lag or delay. Everything still feels quite snappy. Command-wise, pretty typical for Windows Phone 8. You can long hold on the back key to open up multitasking, where you're able to close off certain apps in the background and then jump back and forth between it. I can tap on the search key there just to quickly launch into Cortana, which is very interesting. So this was the introduction of Microsoft's AI voice assistant, and it works pretty well. There's also a drag-down notification shade for toggling things like Wi-Fi, Bluetooth on and off. There is also built-in NFC for contact, for sharing information, mobile payment, but there is no wireless charging. So let's take a quick look at how it's held up in terms of web browsing first. I'm just going to jump into Internet Explorer as the default app. Hello everyone, here at OS Reviews. And we've loaded up the video, and it's just playing back pretty quickly here. So everything does seem to be working pretty well. Let's mute the sound for now. You can tell that the interface here, it's not as optimized as maybe a YouTube app, but one of the limitations of Windows phones, even before it was discontinued, is definitely less app support compared to Android. I can full screen it, and you can tell that the transitions here are decent in terms of their speed, and again, the viewing angles of the display are quite good, and the 720p HD resolution is still holding up pretty well. Definitely no longer as good as, more expensive flagship phones with 2K displays, but it still feels comfortable. There's still plenty of budget phones that have worse screen resolutions than this one, and at 4.7 inches, it's a little bit smaller as well, so the PPI count really isn't that bad. One thing I really do like about Windows phones, though, is the placement of the address bar on the very bottom of the screen, which makes a lot of sense because as phones' displays have gotten larger and larger, to reach all the way to the top to change the address seems like a pretty cumbersome ergonomic design. But on here, you can simply tap on this and begin changing the URL. So for instance, if we want to try out the New York Times, we can type that in, and the default Windows Phone keyboard is definitely one of my favorites compared to Android. The keys are really large, they're spacious and easy to use. And a little bit slowly but surely it is loading up the entire page. Again, this is a very complex page because it has lots of scrolling elements, a lot of text as well as images that makes it more difficult on lower powered phones, but it seems to be doing a decent job. Not too much checkerboarding, and the pinch to zoom is still quite smooth. Obviously a lot more jumpy than on newer Android phones, especially flagship devices, but still more than usable, I'd say. When it comes to multitasking, the phone has just 1 gig of RAM, and that's about the same as you'll find on Android Go edition phones as well, so other budget devices. Windows Phone is very good at, again, organizing the RAM as well as balancing multitasking, so it's not too big of a problem, but I would personally keep tabs open under, let's say, 5 or 6 if you want the fastest experience, and you can then jump around pretty easily between these tabs just by tapping between them. Moving on to the camera, we can just launch into it just by tapping on the key there. You can see that the interface here is pretty typical as far as a Windows Phone is concerned. Samsung hasn't added too much customization, but there are a few filters that they have tweaked around with, including on the side here, lenses. So there is a manga camera mode, which is kind of cool. It applies some filters that kind of captures images in black and white mode. So you can tap on it and it gives you kind of a preview where you can change the saturation as well. Now you are able to capture video up to 720p, so also in HD resolution, but there is no stabilization of any sort. So video quality isn't going to be the best in the world. Now when it comes to images though, I was still fairly impressed. Although it's definitely not as saturated looking as on newer Samsung phones, especially their flagship Android offerings, it still gives you a good amount of detail with 8 megapixels, and the autofocus allows you to again capture images that look fairly clean and sharp with accurate looking colors. It does need more light though because there's no HDR built on in, so you do need to make sure you're in a pretty well lit environment if you want the best effect. But under again a good amount of lighting, shots do turn out fairly well represented. The flash is also quite powerful, so it does a good job of illuminating subjects in the dark, although it can also overexpose your images depending on the setting, so you do have to keep that in mind. Overall, the camera I would say has aged fairly well. Not really a notable lens, just because a lot of Nokia's Lumia lenses with Carl Zeiss are stronger shooters per se, but it's also not too bad for a phone from 5 years ago. Now a quick sample of the speaker quality on the phone. Mids and highs do sound pretty clean, but it doesn't pack very loud volume. It's kind of easy to cover up because of the placement on the back, and it doesn't have that much bass. Definitely not great per se, but if you are in a pinch and you have to listen to some music using the speakers, it does work all right. When it comes to other apps and programs, Samsung did include a few proprietary apps or bloatware, and that includes ATIV Beam, which is using NFC to share content between other Samsung devices. There's also a battery manager built on in. There's, in addition to Facebook is preloaded, we also have access to a mini diary, which is kind of a journal app built from Samsung that allows you to, again, create quick memos and begin kind of drawing away. So for instance, hello. And again, the screen is very sensitive, so it's responsive to use like any other Samsung phone. It makes drawing and doodling pretty easily despite the lack of a stylus. And of course, as a Microsoft phone, one of the highlights is going to be productivity. So you do have access to OneNote and all of the Office built on in, including Word, Excel, and PowerPoint. So you're able to quickly create and edit documents on the fly, making it ideal for business environments where you have to always look at spreadsheets or PowerPoints, and you can just edit those directly from your phone. Even though they now have free versions for Android as well, it still was more optimized on a Windows Phone device just because, again, it's designed by Microsoft. There's a wallet app that allows you to store boarding passes as well as credit card information that uses NFC as well. Gaming-wise, it also suffices, but again, there's not as many titles compared to an Android phone, even an older one, so you'll be a lot more restricted in terms of playing back titles. Most of them are 2D or a lot more simple in terms of their animations, but they will still load up just fine. So you can check out more details in the links down below. Again, I would say this is still a passable phone for light usage and you're really on a budget, just because, again, the screen size is going to be larger than many other devices in the same price range. If you're looking at $20 to $30, it does make phone calls just fine. It does, do some very light web browsing and video consumption just fine. And obviously the Microsoft services still work just fine. But if you're expecting, again, newer apps and titles to be run on here, then that's where you'll kind of be disappointed. And I would recommend you to go with an older Android phone in lieu of something like this. But that's been our video. Thanks for watching here at OS Reviews. That's been a throwback look at the Samsung ATIV S Neo here in 2018.